Sziasztok! Ez itt a nagyító alatt Michael Jackson, az első magyar nyelvű podcast a pop királyáról, és én Niki vagyok. A mai adásunkban Rob Disnerrel beszélgetek. Rob Disnert kevesen ismerik a magyar rajongók közül, illetve egy kisebb fajta botrány miatt egy kicsit talán ismertebb lett szélesebb körben, de erről majd szó lesz az epizódban is, úgyhogy nem akarok spoilerezni. Szóval Rob Disner a Michael Jacksonnak amolyan kifutófiúja volt, mindenese volt a Dangerous albumnak a felvételei során. Nem egyedül, rajta kívül még ketten voltak, így nem töltött minden napot ott a stúdióban, de van egy pár jó kis sztoria, és ezt egy nagyon vékony kis pici könyvbe ki is adta, amit én olvastam. Mivel nagyon sokáig tart a feliratozás, ezért 3-4 részletben fogom nektek felirattal kiadni ezt a beszélgetést. Az angol nyelvűt azt viszont egy az egybe föl fogom majd tenni a YouTube-ra, meg a Spotify-ra is. És ezért elnézést kérek, de mivel egyedül csinálom a feliratozást, ez munka mellett, stb. Ez elég sokáig tart. Hát akkor az első részt fogadjátok szeretettel.
Okay, so Rob Disner, welcome to.
Thank you for having me.
To my podcast. It's a pleasure to have you today. Where are you calling in from?
I am in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been here for about 10 years now.
And it's afternoon there, right?
It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, before dinner.
Good afternoon to you. Well, it's 10 p.m. in here, and I actually made a mistake because we were supposed to be 5 hours ahead of you, but
that's what I thought.
We changed the time. I think maybe 2 weeks ago or something like that. We changed the clock.
Our time changed.
Your time changed.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah, we changed it here last weekend.
So never mind. Now we're here and we can do this. Okay. Well.
All right.
First, I think I should tell you where I learned about you. Actually, you were a studio runner, if I'm correct, but you can correct me if I'm not saying it right.
You're absolutely correct.
And you are not that extremely vocal about your time with Michael Jackson, so it's not like it's all over the internet. But somehow I think I came across a video on YouTube. I was looking for something else, and that's what I heard about you first. And then I also mentioned your name to Brett Sundberg, and I was wondering whether I should do a podcast with you or not. So here we are. But the Hungarian fans, I don't think they know too much about you. So can you just first tell us what's your connection to Michael Jackson? But you can start. You can start a bit earlier, like who you are and how did you actually meet him? Why did you meet him? How did your paths cross, as I usually say it?
I'm happy to tell you, and I'm not surprised people don't know me, because unlike Brad Sundberg, my job was, not critical to the project. I was one of a few people who did a job which you exactly called it right, was called a runner. And a runner is literally that. You go and you run and you do errands for the people working in the studio. So while Brad Sundberg was in the room recording vocals with Michael, I was getting his lunch order and driving and picking it up. Mm-hmm. So I worked for the studio, not for Michael. I just happened to work at the studio where Michael happened to be recording Dangerous, and I did that for 2 years. I actually got the job because they said a lot of the people we work with have tattoos and things like that. And this was back in the early 90s, and maybe their hair was a little, crazy or whatever. And the guy that hired me said, "You look kind of normal, and we want to send you to work with Michael so he won't really, be concerned about you or, look at you and notice you, or you'll just kind of blend into the background."
I see.
So that's how I ended up. But I'll go back very quickly and say that for me, it really started in high school. I ran my high school radio station. This was in Detroit, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
This was back when we had radio stations in high schools. It sounds silly now because we have podcasts now, and we have Spotify, and you can make your own radio station all day. So I'm sure high school radio stations, I can't imagine there are any of them left.
Yeah,
but
right.
when I went to high school in the 80s, they had radio broadcasting programs, and it was great. You learned how to be on the radio and how to be a disc jockey and how to produce, commercials and things like that. And so I was the person who, was in charge of the radio station the last year that I was in high school. And what I found was that I enjoyed being a disc jockey and playing the records, but what I really liked was doing the production, was doing the editing and running the console, running the board and the equipment. I liked more of the technical side of it versus, being a disc jockey. So anyway, so I went to college, and I went to one college for a couple of years, and then I got into a school called the Berklee College of Music in Boston. And there I specifically learned how to be a recording engineer, because that's what I decided I wanted to do. I wanted to work in recording studios. I wanted to, work on projects like Dangerous with Michael Jackson. So I learned how to be a recording engineer and graduated. My degree was music production and engineering. Right after that, I moved out to Los Angeles. I had a job at a studio called The Record Plant for a few months. There, I was working as a janitor, and I was cleaning the bathrooms and, dusting the gold records on the wall. It was not what I wanted to do. So I thought, I'm just going to try to go work at another studio. And I got a job at the studio, which was called Ocean Way. Ocean Way, they were two big studios in Hollywood. And I liked the people there better. And I still had to be a janitor, but it was a little different. It wasn't as much, work and, the kind of stuff I had been doing before. And then, like I said, soon after I worked there, I talked to my boss, who was a nice guy named Jack. And Jack said, "We want to send you out to this other studio we have called Record One, which is in Sherman Oaks. And we want you to work because Michael Jackson is just starting this new record there. And we think you would fit in well. Like I said, you don't have tattoos. You're not scary looking. You wear nice clothes, whatever." So, and I was thrilled because I lived 2 blocks away from Record One. So I didn't have to drive to Hollywood anymore. I could walk to the studio if I wanted to. Of course, I couldn't walk because I was always driving to pick up, lunch and things like that. But I was very close to that studio, so I was thrilled to work there. And I didn't know at the time, but I was there pretty much from the beginning of Dangerous, which would have been right around the beginning of 1990, until after the record came out in November of 91. So pretty much a 2-year period when I was there doing that job.
Now, we all know that Michael Jackson is a huge star, and he always will be. He's the biggest. Even if you're not a fan, that's what people say. He's known everywhere. But did you meet any other stars before him, or did you work around other stars like Michael Jackson before him?
No, certainly nobody as big as Michael Jackson, who, of course, like you said, was the biggest star. But yeah, I mean, at the other studio I worked with, I started as a parking lot attendant. I parked a lot of cars for famous people. I parked cars for Milli Vanilli, and I parked the cars of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. and I parked the cars, when Bonnie Raitt worked there and Guns N' Roses. And so, yeah, of course, many people, but because my job was either parking a car or sweeping the floor or going to get lunch, you're not going to have an extended conversation with these people. Some people, of course, are nicer than others, and you will have an exchange or whatever and say hi or nice to see you or how you doing. And of course, some people just will ignore you because you're not doing anything, that is important to them. You're just the guy out in the parking lot, or the guy getting lunch. So I met a lot of people. I certainly met people at Ocean Way Studios as well. But I had just gotten out of college. Within the first 6 months of living in Los Angeles, I was already working with Michael, and that was, of course, the biggest person I had ever met, and to this day, probably still, of course, the biggest. You can't get any bigger than Michael. But it's funny because it was such a different time. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have our cell phones.
Yeah.
We didn't have this exposure. Like, it would have never occurred to me that someone in Hungary loved Michael Jackson, or somebody in Australia loved Michael Jackson, or that millions of people in Japan, were crazy about Michael Jackson. It makes sense, but it's not anything I ever thought of because we just didn't have that kind of exposure to the big world that we do now that we have the internet. And for me, it was just a job. I worked in a studio. The things I thought about every day were, I don't want to be the guy that gets lunch anymore and answers the phones. I want to be a recording engineer. So how can my career move along? Back then, I was thinking more about me and how I can, start to get better jobs than the fact that, oh, well, that is Michael Jackson. He's the biggest star on the planet. It's just a job. I showed up every day, and it just happened to be that my job was for 2 years working with Michael Jackson. I wish really, and I thought about this many times since, that I had figured out some way to capture that time, like taking pictures or keeping a diary, or try to find some other way to document other than just my memories from 30 years ago. But that wasn't my job, And I think it's just as likely if I would have said, Michael, can I take pictures every day of everything that's going on for 2 years? They would have said no.
Of course.
That wasn't my job.
Yeah.
So you always knew that even though Michael was fun to be around and nice and friendly, and we had like a nice, relationship, me and him, for the times that I would see him and whatever, you always knew that if, Michael Jackson had a bad day and looked at you and didn't like something you said or did or whatever, like, you'd be gone. They would find someone else to come in and do my job. So I always just try to be friendly and pleasant, and I never took a single picture with Michael Jackson the whole time, and I feel terrible about it now. But I never once said, Michael, just come here and I'm going to take a picture, me and you. Never did it. I just didn't want to bother him.
Yeah, but you could have done it. You were just too polite, I guess.
I'm sure I could have.
I mean, he had his picture taken with all kinds of people. Sometimes these pictures come up on the internet, on social media, and we are just wondering about who the hell that might be. And sometimes we find out, sometimes we don't. But anyway, my point was,
well, I do have this. I don't know if you can see it on your camera.
Yeah, that's Brad Sandberg. Yeah, they are playing
and that's
Jenga.
Brad and Michael. They're playing Jenga. So I took that picture. Okay. I took it with the Polaroid camera from the studio. So that's all I have is a picture that I took.
I see. Yeah. That's also that's also a famous picture. Okay, so you weren't Star Trek at all when you started working there?
I really have never been that way because I've always worked in the entertainment business, whether I work in film or TV, which I'm doing now, or back then when I worked, in the music business. It was my job. And I just kind of always realized that these are just people. And yes, they might be multimillionaires and famous, and they're on MTV and they're doing tours and they're all over the world. But, I'm a musician and a guitar player, and I've done that since I was 12 years old. And I figure I'm, the same as these people who love music and are creative and want to play it. I'm just not successful, and they're, incredibly successful. But yeah, no, I don't really remember. At the time I was into more rock and roll, and Brad Sundberg will tell you the same thing when he worked with Michael. Like those weren't the things that either one of us were listening to personally. I appreciate Michael Jackson's music a lot more now that I look back on it, and that I kind of have a, wider range of music that I'm interested in. Back then I liked, punk rock bands, and my favorite band was The Clash. So Michael Jackson was like, he's the guy on TV, and I know, and he dances and does those songs, but I didn't own Michael Jackson records at the time. And, I didn't, just think much about him in my daily life. And, I didn't know much about him either until I started working with him.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So Dangerous was the album. And just for our listeners, this is the first album that he wasn't working with Quincy Jones on.
Right.
He had...
Yeah, and I never got to meet Quincy because, of course, and we know Quincy just passed away, which is very sad. And Brad Sundberg knew him very well. And, of course, Bruce Swedien, has that long history with him. And we all know the great work that Quincy did on Michael's records. But, I think, because this was Michael's first attempt to be a producer, that, Quincy was not really invited to the studio. He did not try to come to the studio. I think it was, Quincy may, and I don't know, I just assume Quincy may have been, a little bit insulted that he was not asked to participate on this record. I don't know if he wanted to or didn't want to or whatever, but I'm not surprised that I never saw or met Quincy, because I think this was Michael's statement that, now I'm producing myself. Now I'm making my own record. I don't want Quincy even to come by and hear any of it, and even to tell me anything or whatever, because, that's what I'm trying to move on from. And, I'm trying to be the person now who's in charge. So, so I never got to meet Quincy, which I wish I had, but, I can kind of understand why. So.
Yeah, but you met Bruce, who is also huge. I mean, I have great I have great respect for Bruce Swedien.
Bruce was a very nice guy, and when these people could, they were helpful to me as a sound engineer who wanted to move up in the business and learn more when they could, and they were very busy and very involved, and they didn't need to share any sound engineering information with me. That was not anything that they had to do or whatever, but when they could, they would let me in the room and they would let me see how things were set up. Usually when Michael wasn't in there, I think it's maybe just a couple of times that I was actually in the room when Michael might have been recording something or setting up, or was just sitting maybe and listening. Usually most of it, if I think about it, he was listening to playback he had already done. I don't know that I ever got to see Michael sing or do a vocal. That was always very private and special. But, they were nice enough to let me, set up, the microphones and, get things situated. And I would do some work at the end of the night, documenting the things that they did. That Polaroid camera that I took the picture of Brad and Michael with. We would take pictures of the console with the Polaroid camera. This was back before the electronics were advanced enough that they could remember themselves with computers and that kind of stuff. You just had to take a picture. So you would take a picture of the channel that was playing back the bass, and you would take a picture of the channel that was, many channels that were playing the drum. So you would see where every knob was pointing and where every switch was this way or that way. And you would you would take dozens of Polaroid pictures. They spent probably, I don't know, $10,000 on, Polaroid film to take a picture every night, so that if something happened, if like the janitor came in and moved a knob or whatever, they could turn it back to the right place. So you'd have a documentation of every single inch of this huge the console they used was two different recording consoles that they stuck together, and it must have been, I don't know, 15, 16 feet long. It was huge.
Mm-hmm.
So when you had to take a picture of every single area of this thing, so that was part of the work we did as runners.
And you had to do it every day?
You had to do it maybe when they were about to switch, because they would often, depending on Michael's mood, they would be working on, black or white for a week. And then Michael would say he wanted to work on Dangerous, and it would be in the same studio. And sometimes, Bruce Swedien would be in Studio B, which was the big studio at Record One. And the next week, Bill Vittrell would be in Studio B. Mm-hmm. So it's the same equipment. So they would have to document everything so that then when they went back 2 weeks later or whatever to work on black or white again or whatever it would have been, that they have to set everything back up the way it was. So that was one way they did it, was to look at all these pictures and to say, okay, well, now we can go back and see where this was and that was and that kind of thing.
Okay. Now it's completely clear. All right. Why don't we start talking about Michael himself? So
Sure.
You can start wherever you like. I've read your little book too. The Kindle version of it. I know some of the stories, but I'll let you just go for it.
So, like I said, I started in the beginning of 1990. I think it was pretty much right at the beginning of Dangerous. I think they had done some work. Bill Vittrell had done some work previously at Westlake Studios, where they had done Bad and Thriller, but it was just like setting up. They call it pre-production. It was not, serious work that was going to end up on the record. They were just programming things and listening to sounds and setting up things. But I think I got there pretty much right when Dangerous started. And my first interaction with Michael was that he ran in, and I think this was the first day, at least I remember it that way. He ran in and he said, there's a vagabond in the alley. And a vagabond is a really funny word that nobody uses anymore. That's like a word that somebody would have used, 100 years ago. And it means a bum. Mm-hmm. So there was a bum. And, he said, there's a vagabond in the alley. And I had to even think what is a vagabond? Oh, I remember. It's like a tramp or a bum. They used to call Charlie Chaplin a vagabond. So I had to go back to the back of the studio, and there was some guy drinking a beer out of a paper bag. And I had to say, okay, move along, buddy, But this, in Hollywood, you would expect this. You would see street people and homeless people. Where we were in Sherman Oaks was a very nice neighborhood. It was very unusual that somebody would have been sitting back there drinking a beer out of a paper bag. It never happened again. It just happened to happen on that day. And this was back when Michael was driving his own car. And that is a whole other chapter of the book. Again, he wanted to feel some freedom. He wanted to feel like a normal person. So he would drive himself. He had a secret apartment that very few people knew about that was in, I think, West Los Angeles in a high-rise building. And I went there once.
That was the hideout, I think. They called it the hideout. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There was nothing there. There was a bed and a TV, and it was a beautiful, expensive apartment, but there was really nothing in it that I remember. But I don't even remember why I was there, to pick up something, I guess, or whatever. So he would drive in from there, or maybe he would go up to Neverland for the weekend and he would come in on Monday, or he'd stay at Havenhurst at the family, home. He would stay in, I think, both of those places, alternating. But anyway, so he started to have a lot of trouble driving his own car. There were many accidents and problems and issues. One day he drove in, and he said, he used to call me Robbie, and he'd say, Robbie, close the gate. Robbie, close the gate. Close the gate. Is there another vagabond? What's out there? But so he had gotten in an accident, on the
Oh.
101 freeway, which is the big freeway in Los Angeles, and he had hit somebody. He had, traffic always stopped all the time. It's Los Angeles traffic. So the traffic ahead of him stopped. He hit the person and then he drove away. Now I understand, what's Michael Jackson going to do? Get out on the freeway and cause 20 more accidents and everyone will see him standing on the side of the freeway or whatever? So he didn't know what to do. And, it totally, makes sense. And so he just drove to the studio, but this guy was following him. So when he got into the studio, this guy was honking and yelling and screaming. And I had to say, look, you were just hit by Michael Jackson. I said, his insurance will take care of it, his production. And I gave him, I'm sure, a number, somebody to call this person and they'll work it out. And he actually was a reasonable person. And he said, oh, I didn't know what was happening, but okay. He could see he was at a recording studio and he calmed down. But Michael also would back into people in the studio. I remember he hit Bill Bottrell's BMW once. He just was not a good driver. He was a little guy and he had a big truck. And he had this big truck so he could drive from Record One Studios in the Valley in Sherman Oaks all the way up to Neverland Ranch and never stop. So he actually had an extra gas tank put in the truck so he could have a lot of gas in the truck. And he used to give me his credit card and I would go fill up his truck with 40 or 50 gallons of gas, twice as much gas as a normal vehicle would have. And then he could just drive all the way and never have to stop. I don't remember how far it is up there, an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever it was, but he wouldn't have to worry about running out of gas.
Yeah. I remember that. Okay. And when did he eventually give up driving himself to the studio?
He did. He had a manager named Norma Stakos.
Yes.
And she kind of was his handler and she kind of would look after him. And if some person wanted to meet him in the studio or something or other, like if Brooke Shields wanted to come over, or I think the Backstreet Boys maybe came over once. Madonna came over, like a few, not that many, but every once in a while someone would want to visit the studio for one reason or other. And he would kind of schedule all those things and maybe even pick those people up and bring them to the studio or whatever. So at some point, Michael stopped driving and then he started just driving him into the studio every day and dropping him off. I think that was for a while. And then I don't remember. I don't know. He got to the studio somehow with someone else, or maybe he hired a service or a limousine or something drove him. I don't know. He stopped driving maybe after 3 or 4 months and then didn't drive anymore after that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned visitors. I know that Slash worked on a song, and
Yep.
the Princess of Monaco, Stephanie, she was involved in The Closet, that song.
Yep.
So do you remember their visit or the time they spent in the studio?
I was one of, I think, 3 people who were studio runners who were mainly there all the time. There was a guy named Rich and a woman named Lottie, and we all had the same kind of job and worked different shifts. Interestingly, Lottie was Lottie Kierkegaard, and she's Soren Kierkegaard's, I think, granddaughter.
Wow.
So she wanted to be a singer and I think a studio engineer too. And she was working there. And I know this guy, Rich Veltrup, he runs a studio now. I don't remember where, Arizona or something or other. But so we were all interested in getting our careers going and that kind of thing. So I do remember having to go. Was I old enough? Yeah, I guess. I was old enough. I had to buy like a gallon of vodka for Slash. He wanted to have a giant bottle of vodka. But for whatever reason, I was not on the shift when Slash was there. I know he came in and recorded. So I must have gone home. He probably came in later at night or whatever. So I was not there for that. And I don't think Princess Stephanie recorded in our studio. I think that was done somewhere else. I don't I think he had moved to a different studio after that because he started splitting his time at another studio called Larrabee, and Larrabee was kind of on the other side of the valley, and he'd be going kind of back and forth, and that's where he did all the stuff with Teddy Riley.
Mm-hmm.
And so it may have been that she was recorded there, because I think In the Closet was mainly a Teddy Riley song.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it kind of probably makes sense that it was done somewhere where I didn't see it.
Yeah.
We had a period where for 3 months he never came into our studio, but we had to bring tapes back and forth. So they would be working at this other studio, but we'd have to come in every day because we didn't know if Michael wanted to work that day. You know, at the last minute, he'd decide to come back. Like, he was still renting and paying for the studio every day. So the staff had to keep showing up, but we'd just be sitting around. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there was no internet. You know, we didn't have any way to entertain ourselves. We just sitting there looking at the walls, whatever. But
Yeah.
the good story about In the Closet, of course, is that Madonna was supposed to be the person who sang on that originally.
Mm-hmm.
And Madonna.
Eddig tartott az első rész, remélem, hogy tetszett nektek. A következő rész az körülbelül egy hét múlva várható. Tartsatok velem akkor is. Sziasztok!